Well, it's a great pleasure to be with you. I wish that I was there in person, but this is a good low carbon alternative. Um, and I'm so grateful for the work that you're all doing. And let me just say, really, for the work that Mike Scott has done forever and ever. Um, that to me is some of the best work that's gone on. I'm going to speak briefly. People have already said some of the things that give me pause and give me hope. As with Dennis, I was flat out scared by the news in April that we've lost the grounding for the West Antarctic ice sheet and that it's on the move. That adds 10 feet to the sea level rise that we're already in panic about. It's the strongest sign, in a sense, of just how out of control we've let things get. But not, of course, the only one. The Arctic is melting fast as well. Um, y'all in the Northwest have a good sense of just how quickly the ocean is acidifying. The day before yesterday, the demographers tell us we passed the point where a majority of people alive on this planet have never spent a day in on a globe with the monthly temperature below the 20th century average. That is, the majority of people are now um, have grown up entirely in the global warming age, never knew the Holocene. Uh, um, um, and of course, this is just the beginning. We've raised the temperature of the Earth about 1 degree so far. That's caused the chaos and the sadness that we're seeing, including contributing, as the scientists now tell us in study after study, to instability and civil war. The world round, we know that Syria, for instance, was triggered in part by massive drought that drove people off the land and into cities. And we see now how the trauma that started in Syria is spreading around the world with such grievous consequences, even as we're sitting here speaking. The other thing that gives me pause is the amazing greed and financial power of the people who want to keep this thing going a little while longer. The fossil fuel industry is the richest industry on Earth. Exxon made more money last year than any company in the history of money. They're well aware of what they're doing to the planet. If you wanted any other proof, it would be that they lined up dizzily to bid for the rights to go drill in the Arctic once they'd melted it. If you look at their business plans, they call for, taken together, burning about 5 times more carbon than the most conservative scientist thinks would drive us past 2 degrees warming, like the only red line the world has ever drawn. And yet their financial power is enough that this irrational folly continues to be policy in place after place after place, including our own country, where an all of the above energy policy has led us in the course of the Obama administration to pass Russia and Saudi Arabia as oil and gas producers, and where coal exports are at an all-time high, though we're extremely hopeful that our brothers and sisters there in the Pacific Northwest will be able to hold the line against those new coal ports in places like Longview and Cherry Point. We're so grateful for that work and for the leadership that's coming from Governor Inslee and others in that fight. So I think that there's a lot to be sober about, and I'm sober a good deal of the time. I mean, perhaps not surprisingly, I wrote the first book about all of this, and it had the cheerful title, The End of Nature. So if you were hoping for an all-out optimist, you could have chosen more wisely than me. On the other hand, there are a few things that do give me hope. Mostly, they're about the rise of a movement to take on this crisis, a movement that didn't exist 4 or 5 years ago, really. I think up until that point, people had more or less assumed that reason would prevail, That's why scientists kept going up to Capitol Hill year after year, and so forth all around the world, telling our leaders that the worst thing that ever happened in the world was in the process of happening, and perhaps they might want to do something about it. As it turned out, they never did want to do anything about it. And so at a certain point, a few years ago, people began to decide that the time had come to do again what Dennis did back in 1970 and start bringing people into a movement. That movement is global. At 350.org, I think we've held about 20,000 rallies in every country on earth except North Korea. So CNN said it's probably the most widespread political activity in the planet's history. That movement is led by people on the front lines of this fight, indigenous people up in the far north who are in the lead of the fight against the Keystone Pipeline, our indigenous friends across the Pacific who are launching a flotilla of canoes that they're building at the moment. They're launching in September to head to Australia and try and blockade the coal ports there before they can send any more carbon out and drown those nations. It's being led by environmental justice groups in New York City, where there'll be a huge march on September 21st that I hope if some of you find yourselves back east, you'll join. Those community groups understand in the wake of Hurricane Sandy what the stakes are, and they're stepping up. It's being led by scientists around the world who are tired of having their warnings ignored and are stepping up the pressure. It hurts me always to see people like Jim Hansen, our greatest climate scientist, having to go off to jail. I've been in the paddy wagon with him a couple of times. It hurts because he should be in the lab doing incredibly crucial work. In a rational world, that's where he would be. It's crazy that he has to languish in jail, but so be it. It's also being led, this movement, by young people. You have the most at stake. I'm going to be dead before climate change reaches its apogee. I'll be dead in 20 years. That's if I'm lucky. But if you're a young person right now, you're going to be coming into the prime of your life precisely at the time that things go most askew. And whatever good things you're being trained to do now, you'll be working in disaster relief and emergency management until we run out of civilization to do those things. So, of course, young people are leading. The trouble is we need people stepping up and paying attention to those leads on quicker scale than we're seeing so far. We need faith communities doing more than they're doing. It's beginning to happen. 20 years ago, there was no faith-based environmental movement. Conservative churches viewed it as a way station on the road to paganism. Liberal churches thought it was a luxury you got to after poverty and war. But in fact, people are beginning to realize that it's at the heart of those things, and that defense of creation and that loving one's neighbor depends on this work. I think one of the most hopeful, small, symbolic gestures we saw was when the new Pope took his name from our greatest environmental saint, Francis. We're very hopeful that the encyclical that apparently is coming this fall on these issues will be strong and powerful, that it'll join the strong voices of people like the Patriarch of the Eastern Church, Bartholomew, who's forthrightly called global warming a sin and urged us to action. But we need not just to wait for the big bosses to weigh in. We need some real action on the ground all around, and boy, could we use it at Jesuit institutions. I'm so glad that this divestment movement is spread fast around the world, all over the world. There are dioceses and the Antipodes that have already divested, the United Church of Christ and the Unitarian Church in this country, the World Council of Churches earlier, colleges and universities, maybe most significantly, the University of Dayton in Ohio, not on the coast, but in Ohio, and not a kind of liberal enclave, but a Marianist Catholic institution. Time for the Jesuits to catch up to the Marianists here and divest their holdings now and take a strong political stand against the industry that's wrecking the planet that God asked us to watch out for. That's as hopeful a call to action as I think I'm going to come up with. I'm not all the time filled with hope. I don't know that we're going to win this fight. The odds seem to me reasonably long right now. But I do know that there's going to be a fight. It's underway. It is the great fight of our time. And we all have a huge role to play in it, to push hard, hard, hard. Not to settle for small changes, because at this point they're not going to do a bit of good, but instead to rewrite the structures that keep us tied to fossil fuel. We don't need to be tied there. The Germans have illustrated that. They're the one country that took this seriously. There were days this summer when they generated 75% of their power from solar panels within their borders. If you can do that in Germany, you can do it almost anywhere on Earth. Think what a country could do that had, I don't know, Florida, California, Nevada, New Mexico, Texas, places like that to work with. So it's not a lack of technology. It's a lack of political will. And the good news is political will is something that we can manufacture, and we are doing our best, and I am so grateful for all of you. We're really in this fight. We're really willing to do the sometimes uncomfortable, but always necessary things to move forward quickly. And I'm especially grateful to all those students right now who are working hard on this divestment campaign. You guys are showing us the way. God bless you for it. Thank you all.